21 years after our country's freedom, there's still a group of people who haven't tasted the fruits of that freedom. These are lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and intersex people, better known as the LGBTI community. But there may be rays of hope with the case of 24-year-old lesbian Gift Makau, brutally killed last year in Ventersdorp. Her perpetrator, Bulestofo Botlokwane, was sentenced to 2 life terms for her murder and rape. He also received 15 years for robbery. But what more can be done to ensure that other LGBTI hate crime victims get sufficient justice?
Gay and lesbian rights groups staged a protest action outside the Ventersdorp Magistrates Court today. Now, this comes as the suspect of the brutal murder of a 24-year-old lesbian disabled Gift Makau appeared in court today. Makau was found half naked, a wire around her neck with an open hosepipe pushed down her throat. Gay and lesbian groups believe that criminal justice system is failing them.
And so continued the quest to bring justice for disabled Gift Makau. Openly lesbian, Gift's loved ones described her as a soccer lover, quiet. She had dreams of bettering her family's situation.
Into ndimkhumbula ngayo bubukhwayiti bakhe enokuthanda kwakhe isikolo. Isikolo besithanda kakhulu. Uyabona, ebethanda isikolo kakhulu. Kuthi uyabona nesimo sakibo ukuthi sinjani. But ebengagive up ni. Yena beziqala kuthini ufuna uzibona engena isikolo ephumelele igqibile eqedile isikolo ufuna uzibona esebenza encedisa isisi wakhe lapha ekhaya.
When Gift didn't come home one night in August last year, her mother didn't make much of it. That's until a neighbor knocked on her door and told her to come to the yard opposite her house.
Masingena kulo jarto okay right ijarta khona imanzi igcwele idama lamanzi intontoni enomalume wakhona lapho iGift ebebulawela khona manifika khona ngiyababuza ngithi lapha ninzise lentoni hayi abakhuluma abantu ngiyababuza ndithi kulo sisi yazi intoni ndinevalo lokuthi kwenzakala yini lapha hayi abakhulumi sokunendayibona itepe kwi right spread amanzi intontoni ifakwe ithumbu mandizojonga le tepe le ndijonge lithumbu mandi jonge lithumbu okay right manje nanku Gift aphalele khona ndithi kuloma hayi ingane yami leli lapha yabo ensho mandizirutla kuye ngithi ngiyaya okay right ndiyobona ukuthi kwenzeka ndithi ndiyomvusa khusi benibonelele ngomqolo ayibona into njalo la sisi uyanibamba uthi no ungamsondeli ndithi hayi ngingamsondeli ulimele ingane yami kana yini athi hayi Gift isishonile.
Gift was half naked. She had been raped and strangled with wire and a shoelace. A running hosepipe had been forced into her mouth. It's reported that she had gone out with friends, one of them being the perpetrator, Bulestofo Botlokwane, who was known to her. His mother found Gift's phone with him and reported him, which led to his arrest.
Ha ke a solofela gore ka tsama irile dietse ka gore ne le tšhomi ya gagwe ngwana ba re ne re ha batswa ko bodijalong a tla a motlisa mo legaeng yana ke makala morago go tekena a irile dietse ke be ke sa itumele thata ebile ke ne gopotse gore ga nne e le nna khoto ba ka bene ba mo file bana ba community ya bona gore etsang ka yena.
What has happened here reminds us that something is wrong with us. Something is wrong. The violence and the hatred in this death takes me all over the place. To a woman that was stabbed earlier this week 50 times. To the people killed in Marikana. And so I come to this place and I say to myself, Paul, our nation is not well.
Months later, Bulestofo Botlokwane was sentenced to 2 life terms for rape and murder and 15 years for robbery. Judge Kruger said what he did to the victim, knowing that she was in a same-sex relationship, proves that he is a violent and intolerant person. the perpetrator took Disebo Gift Makao's life away from a partner with whom they were planning to grow together and even get married.
But the way I'm blaming that thing, blaming kare haise motho, blaming kare ncha. That is why kare the sentences tse pedi dia mo tshwanela.
This heavy sentence was hailed as a victory by the LGBTI community, who believed the violent manner in which Gift was killed was because she was lesbian. They believed justice had been served amidst growing concerns about the shortcomings in the prosecution of hate crimes. But for the family, it's still a wound that hasn't healed completely.
Makufika 14 yacanga ukuthi ngane i14 ngililanga lokugqibela ndabona umntana mngamehlo yabona langa le14 langa lokugqibela makuzawuvuka sithi 15 kanti umntana amoshonile uyayibona into njalo ukuthi le date ukuthi lenyanga iniphatha kabuhlungu.
The victory of Pule Stoffel Botlokwane's heavy sentence was short-lived, as months later, another lesbian murder trial came to an end. This time at the Pretoria North Magistrates Court. Thembelihle Sokela's lifeless body was found 2 days after she had been murdered. She was wrapped in a blanket and thrown behind her perpetrator's bed. These are Thembelihle's actual clothes found at the crime scene.
Yimi engamthatha ngazana yena eJoburg umntana sihlale eNatali khona manje angazi ukuthi into engizoyithini angazi ubuhlungu nje ehliziyweni.
Thembelihle's perpetrator, Thabo Molefe, was handed a sentence of 22 years for raping and murdering her. Molefe has several other convictions, going as far back as the 1980s. In his judgment, Judge Mkhotsi said to Molefe, "You violated her dignity and took away her right to life. She had the right to walk the streets at any time, had the right to go out and enjoy herself, had the right to be lesbian." This time around, LGBTI groups felt they'd been dealt a hard blow.
We were hoping for at least a life sentence because this man, he killed, he raped, so we do not need people like that in our communities.
Do you feel let down?
We feel that the justice system have let us down once again.
Gift Makao and Thembelihle Sokela are some of the known faces of hate crimes. At Thembelihle's funeral, activists came to say goodbye to one of their own. LGBTI advocacy rights groups like Iranti.org, which document hate crimes, believe the violent manner in which the two lesbians were killed was to send a strong message.
This was just not to rape and kill a woman. This was to show them or show her and her family that you kind of don't mean anything. Dare I say, an animal would do something like that. It was just horrible.
Thembelihle's perpetrator's sentence of 22 years has organizations like theirs, as well as the Forum for the Empowerment of Women, calling for hate crime legislation.
One of the laws that we've been advocating for is a hate crime legislation, with the hope that it will contribute in convictions to be more harsher sentences, but also sentences that will take into consideration that the incident that has happened was motivated by one's sexual orientation.
One of the difficulties for us right now is that we don't have hate crimes legislation. So there isn't very much to guide the prosecution of cases where you think hatred of somebody because their membership of a group might have been a motivation. So what you would probably be wanting to look at is to show, because you'd want to lay the basis for this when it comes to sentence, is you'd want to show that probably that the person who committed the crime knew that their victim was lesbian, and specifically targeted them because they were lesbian with the aim of humiliating and shaming them.
But having to prove that a crime is motivated by hatred can be challenging, even if there is a conviction. Partner at law firm Webber Wenzel, Kerry Williams, knows this too well. She was approached by NPO Out, which serves the LGBTI community. This was after a young black gay man was severely assaulted in a tavern in Germiston and sought legal representation.
There were people being raped, or women particularly being raped and murdered, people being murdered. And at the end of the day, you couldn't prove that it was a hate crime because you had a victim who was dead. So we had a victim who was very articulate. The crime had been preceded by homophobic hate speech, and it was very clear that it was a hate crime. So we thought this is a really good test case because Derek could speak, and it was clear what had happened.
But when the prosecutor initially decided not to prosecute, labeling the incident a tavern brawl and nothing serious, they knew they had a long road ahead.
We took the prosecutor's decision not to prosecute on review. So within the NPA, we elevated it and we got someone to review his decision. And so after, I think it took a year and a half almost to force the prosecutor to prosecute. And then only after that did the case start running. The challenges were extreme. Besides the fact that we had to launch this internal review to get the prosecuting authority to actually prosecute, just in monitoring the case, we must have gone back to court, 50 times. The accused delayed things and played games that were unbelievable. They didn't arrive. Always all three of them had to be present. It was ridiculous. I mean, we went back, the amount of resources that got poured into the case just simply to make sure that it happened was remarkable and very, very frustrating ultimately.
She does, however, warn that hate crime legislation can have its cons.
The concern is that it doesn't actually teach the perpetrators any type of lesson or doesn't change the perpetrator's behavior. And what we do need is qualitative or quantitative research, both of those, to test whether harsher sentences actually have the desired effect, because it's not clear that necessarily there is a causal connection. Some research show there is, some research show there isn't. It's a big, big debate.
Currently, government data capturing forms for crime statistics do not make provisions for hate crimes. Statistics on sexual offences are not published for public access in a form that allows the public to distinguish the motive for the crime. In addition, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and intersex rape survivors are not required to identify their sexual orientation when reporting a rape. Thus, the system is unable to provide accurate statistics on the incidence of this crime. This is a stumbling block, experts say.
We don't understand what the extent of the problem is of rape of lesbians, gay men, bisexuals, transgender men and women, and there's an urgent need to be able to do that. Because if you don't know that, it means that perhaps there aren't the services in place, there isn't the necessary understanding, there aren't the referrals in place to ensure that should something like that happen, people are adequately and appropriately dealt with.
In May 2011, in response to a petition about targeted rape of lesbian women, the Department of Justice and Constitutional Development set up a national task team to look into gender-based violence affecting LGBTI people, such as the killing of Noxolo Nogwaza, a lesbian brutally murdered 4 years ago in the East Rand, whose case made international headlines. In 2013, a subgroup of the National Task Team was created, the Rapid Response Team. Part of its mandate is to follow up and oversee the resolution of 43 uncompleted cases of targeted violence against LGBTI people. Noxolo's case is on the list. But even though more than 20 of these cases have been finalized, Noxolo's hasn't. Deputy Minister of Justice and Constitutional Development explained how these are some of the challenges faced by the National Task Team.
Generally, with any crime, there's got to be evidence. So there are a number of cases that are not detected. In Gauteng and Western Cape, undetected dockets are being re-looked at relating to these cases to see if anything more can be done. But to get a conviction, you need evidence. To get somebody charged, to get them to appear in court, you need evidence. And the problem really is with a lack of evidence.
Such as the case with Noxolo's murder. A mother of two, a lesbian rights activist, her family's breadwinner, her friend took us back to the scene when Noxolo was murdered.
They raped her, they beat her up, they stabbed her repeatedly, they raped her with a beer bottle that was found inserted in her private parts. They bashed her head. When they found her, actually in the morning, pieces of her face were all over the place. It was very brutal, the way that they killed her.
4 years ago, the family made a heartfelt plea for anyone with information to come forward.
Ngicela umphakathi ukuthi usebenzisana nathi usize ngoba sibhlungu kakhulu yazi ngoNoxolo. Sibhlungu kakhulu umuntu owaziyo wanzi something nje. Ngoba nami ngiyasola ukusola kwami akusizi ukuthi vele labantu laba bakhona lapha. Labantu bambulela uNoxolo abantu abamaziyo.
But since then, nothing has happened.
It has been under the investigation ever since, and the case is still being investigated. We followed several leads, but at this stage, no one has been arrested. We hope in the future somebody will come forward and will tell us what had happened.
Amnesty International has been campaigning for justice for Noxolo, writing to South African authorities, both at local and national levels, asking them to ensure there's an adequate investigation into her murder. The lack of progress is overwhelming, they say.
I think it's very disheartening, particularly for the family, who over 4 years later still don't have any answers as to why their granddaughter, their niece, their mother was taken from them. Certainly Noxolo's grandmother has told us that she doesn't feel that she can go home to her rural areas to rest until she knows what's happened to her granddaughter.
The best advice police can offer the family is not to give up hope.
I also advise that if the family has got the number for the investigating officer, they must keep on calling that investigating officer to find out what's happening with the case.
Meanwhile, Noxolo's killers remain at large, while lesbians in the community live in fear.
It's not safe. Noxolo's killers are still out here. You know, they haven't been arrested. Nothing has happened regarding their case. So they are out here, they're probably walking the streets with us. They're probably shopping with us. They're probably going to church with us. I don't know. So, of course, we are not safe. We still have to take a lot of safety measures, you know, when it comes to protecting ourselves.
This is Lungile Dladla, a lesbian in Daveyton. She calls herself a Victor. One evening 5 years ago, Lungile and her friend were stopped by a man on the street with a gun. He forced them into a field and tied them up.
He then asked me, why am I wearing guys' clothes? I kept quiet, I didn't answer him. So he was being aggressive. Why don't I want to answer him? He's going to show me today that I'm a girl, I'm not a guy. And in my mind, I'm thinking, I never said I'm a guy. It's just that I have different preferences and different choices. And then he started raping us.
She says what followed was more trauma from the authorities.
When we got to the police station, that was victimization day, like part 2. Because, well, they believed my friend, they didn't believe me. They were like, how can a guy be raped? Making fun of me and all of that. They didn't even have the right equipment for whatever procedure that was supposed to be done.
According to her, the case was closed, but a year later, when a radio station covered her story, the case was reopened and the perpetrator was convicted. Daveyton says research shows getting a conviction depends on where you are in the country.
Depending on where you get raped in the country is going to affect the quality of justice that you receive. So as the worst example I've seen, a study I did at one rural police station and court in Mpumalanga, their conviction rate was less than 1%. So, you know, if you get raped in Bushbuck Ridge, that's going to be your misfortune. But if you get raped in Gauteng, you might stand a 4% conviction rate. And if you're in another province, it might be as high as 6%.
Lungile later found out her perpetrator had infected her when she started getting sick.
So they took tests and everything. They found out I had lung cancer, I had pneumonia, and that I'm HIV positive. And then they treated me. I stayed there for 2 months. The third month, I was discharged.
She refuses to feel sorry for herself.
I don't want to be treated like a victim. That's what I told myself when I was in that hospital bed. That's one thing that kept me alive till today, because I was really sick. Most people that got to that stage never recovered.
Lungile believes she was raped because she's openly lesbian. Experts explain why the term commonly known as corrective rape is offensive.
I think the concern around calling rape of lesbians corrective rape is that it creates that kind of artificial distinction. But there's also it reinforces the idea that lesbians are abnormal and this is some sort of correction that's needed to make them behave like heterosexual women.
Activists say hate crimes occur in areas where there is a lack of education about the LGBTI community and where socioeconomic conditions are dire. To find out how some young men feel about hate crimes, we sat down with a group of them to hear their views. I started by asking them if they are tolerant of lesbians and gays in their communities and how they treat them.
It's disgusting.
Why is it disgusting?
But at the end, it's a female and it's not a male, but the petty character of a male. What am I supposed to do?
If you are a woman, being if I in Tombazan, if you are a man, if I am fan, you understand? Now say by Pedro couldn't Adam no F. Why you have to change your things? Who's in the in Tombazan? Why? For what actually? You understand? It's a sin. You understand? Why? Why made this change? Yeah, but it means when you don't like yourself. Truly speaking, Sister Rene, we do hate them. You understand? Because of they are changing what they are. You understand? Yeah. But as I said, I can't go to Mumshai for the entire year. Okay. It's not sharp.
Sister Yogba Lumaza, Leo Machita man, Kawasamales Penna Repavi. I stopping the Leo actually move it.
Mzwake Kumalo, a senior trainer at Sonke Gender Justice, explains why these sentiments are worrying, and the majority of men in South Africa disagree with these opinions.
What we need to do is get those men to come out and speak more louder, so that we can all know that it is not only these men that we have in society, we also have other men who really share different sentiments about homosexuality.
He says education is very important.
We live in a society where society has created a box for men, a box for women. In this case, these gender boxes have only one sexual orientation, according to our society, that is heterosexual. So anybody who dares step out of these prescribed gender roles, they are dealt with, harshly so, either by name calling, by being attacked violently, sexually, violated, And so I think we need to try and re-socialize abafana betu in a way that is totally different from these stereotypical, sometimes very harmful masculinities that we seem to re-emphasize as a society.
Gift Macau. Tembelihle Sokela. Notolo Nogwaza, just some of the many faces of hate crimes, others we don't know about. What will it take to stop this scourge?